welcome to Chalk Talk. I am Matt Minich, and joining me today is somebody who is very well known to Bengals fans, the former host of another Bengals podcast. It is Joe Goodberry. Joe, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's fun right now as a Bengals fan, I think, even though we're coming off of this season. But, uniform talk is exciting. People are energized out there.
Yeah, definitely. I got duped. I fell for a fake Schefter account retweeted that the big news that came out was a Lawson extension, and that was not the case. So, but it feels good to have this uniform talk afterwards, and hopefully the people that saw me retweet that forgot about it. And now I'm mentioning it again here. So,
yeah,
good job.
Think everyone has had that at least once in their Twitter experience.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things, just like everything else in life. Like when you go too fast, you make mistakes, right?
Yeah.
But speaking of mistakes, let's get into the coaching staff here. Now you were a guy who is a proponent of hiring a young offensive-minded coach.
Yep.
And I mean, really, this job, it was a different job 2 years ago because you didn't have the first overall pick and you didn't have Joe Burrow at your quarterback. And I mean, honestly, if this job opened up right now, it's more valuable, because you've got Joe Burrow there, you've got something. But you had talked a little bit about you kind of needed to take a guy that maybe needed to grow into the job a little bit, and maybe take a guy who was a year away from being a hot candidate because he couldn't really compete necessarily for that top level coach. And we ended up with Zac Taylor, young offensive mind, part of the McVay tree. Personally, stepping away from the offensive side, I like a lot of the things he gets into in his interviews, and it's hard because we're not there, and even Paul Dehner and Morrison, those guys, like nobody's there right now. James Rapine, nobody's there because of COVID, so we don't know what really happens behind closed doors, what really happens on the practice field. But I love the philosophy that he's preaching to the media anyway. What is your take on Taylor? Obviously, the results haven't been there, but do you think there's a chance that he can grow into this job and he can be the guy that we hoped he could be?
Yeah, I think it is important. I love the way that you started this because looking back at when they had to make this hire, and now maybe that's their own fault. They waited too long to let go of Marvin or move on from that situation, right? I mean, in hindsight, if we're playing that, 2015 was probably a great time to say, all right, you got a loaded roster. Let's see if someone else can take this team over the top. And they didn't. They stretched it out too far, and they got to the point of, remember Todd Grantham. Remember they're bringing in, looking for a defensive coordinator, and I believe the report there was he felt the defensive stars were too old on this team. And you look at the offensive side, and well, AJ Green was getting towards his final few years, maybe his final year in prime, if the Bengals were lucky last year with him. And Andy Dalton, for as much as we like him personally and being the quarterback of the last generation of this team, I think a lot of teams or let's say a lot of GMs or head coaches would have looked at that situation and said, yeah, that's probably not where I want to be stuck unless they're going to guarantee me if we get into the right position, I can take a quarterback, because most teams or most coaches would like their own guy and then a guy that maybe had a little bit more upside. So wasn't a very desirable situation. And I really believe in the point that they were going to have to find a guy that was a few years out. And what I mean by that is you're going to interview some guys here, and whether that be at the time Hugh Jackson and, it wasn't a great list of people at the time, Josh McDaniels turned them down. But when you do talk to a Zac Taylor type, and if you believe in that interview, okay, he is a leader. He can get guys to rally. He knows what he's talking about on offense. He's smart enough. He's dedicated enough. He's got the right mixture of things you look for in a coach. He doesn't have the experience. He's got to figure some things out, obviously. That's okay if you feel like this roster is 2 years away anyway, which, if we were being honest at the time, it probably was. And because of the reasons I just said, they needed to retool and revamp in a few areas and get some new energy in there. And now we are 2 years from that point, and we look back and we can say, all right, What is Zac Taylor? Is he on that path? I think statistically it's hard to make the argument because when you only get, 6 wins in 2 years, it's like, you wish it was 8. Is that a big difference? Kind of is. You wish it was 10 because then you really won't even have an argument. They go 5-11 2 years in a row. I'd say, okay, we're on the right track, or at least there's a chance for it. It's just the numbers wise. So you go game by game, and not me. I'm not going to just look at one number and say, 6 wins, that's it, and no one's overcome this thing, because there's nuance, right? There's gray area for everything. We know how many games they blew this year, man. They could have started off 6-3 at one point. And I think if you play that game, you can make excuses for a lot of people. So that's the danger of it. But it's the truth that they didn't figure it out until it was way too late in this year, until half the roster was injured. But that's also kind of the story of the first year. The Bengals were still playing for Zac Taylor down the stretch last year and this year. You want to see that. So, again, what the answer to the question is, I still don't know. But is there a chance that he could be the guy? Yeah, I do actually think there is still a chance.
So, I mean, honestly, they should have won more games this year. And you got to think that if Burrow is there, they win a couple of those games. Maybe they probably beat Washington in that game. You got to think they beat the Giants as close as that game was. Maybe they even have a chance against the Dolphins. But again, what does that really mean? What does that number really mean necessarily? This year, I always thought that they were probably going to win like 6 games. And that was my take at the beginning of the year, because it wasn't a very difficult schedule. And we didn't even know how bad the NFC East was going to be. But you look at that second half of the year, and you're like, all right, they're going to win some games in the second half of the year. Next year, it looks a lot more difficult already, and we don't know when they're playing. But we know they're playing the Chiefs. We know they're playing the Packers. So you're going to see some high-level competition, in addition to being in perhaps the most, the deepest division in the NFL right now. So what is it? I mean, what does he need to do next year? Is it a number of wins? Is it being in contention for the playoffs in December? Do they have to make the playoffs? Like, what does he have to do to prove that he's the guy and that we're not wasting Joe Burrow's rookie contract?
Right. Yeah, that's a big thing, right? That's like number one on every list of whether it's team building right now, head coach decisions, who to draft, who to sign. It's number one. Joe Burrow's plastered right over top of everything. Don't forget, Joe Burrow's on a rookie contract, and that means you have 5 years to maximize this roster and do your thing and get as close as you can for a franchise that probably won't stretch the cap as hard as possible. You need to do this under his rookie deal, it seems. And when you look at Taylor and you say, okay, what do I want for 2021 to make sure he's the guy? I have to assume Vegas betting odds are going to have him as the first coach fired. Probably the guy who doesn't make it through the entire year if he starts off the way he did the last 2 years. They can't have that. That's obvious. Okay, that's the easy part to say. What can't they have? They can't start off 2-6 or worse. So I think when I look at Taylor's trajectory, it has to be tied with Joe Burrow, his trajectory too. When you draft a quarterback, especially you draft him number 1 or high, and he's your guy, year 2 is you better be competing for the playoffs. And I mean, I know where the roster is. It doesn't look like it's ready. I know where the coaching staff is. They don't inspire a lot of confidence that they're at that position, but the timeline is the timeline. If you have 5 years to get this done, year 2, you're competing for it, whether it's Kyler Murray and the Cardinals just not making it. But most good quarterbacks are year 2, man. They're fighting for it or in the playoffs. And if not, then it has to be year 3. So we're at that already of, if you're not surrounding the right guys around Burrow, you're going to create the version of Burrow that's not the best version you need for this franchise. And that's definitely what you don't want. So they need to be 8-8, 7-9, 9-7. They need to be in that range. And I know the schedule is tough, but it is what it is. This is the timeline. Year 2, you got to be going for it, because year 3, you could win the Super Bowl year 2 with a rookie, with that rookie contract quarterback. You could definitely win it year 3. And that needs to be the timeline. We can't forget it. I know what the roster looks like. I know what I'm saying. That is the expectation. That is the timeline.
Yeah, I mean, you can't make that excuse, and you can't get an extra year of Burrow's contract because you're not ready for it.
Right.
So
You got to get ready.
I'm definitely with you on that. And you make a good point. The schedule, I think that was at the end of the year. I was, I was talking a little bit about how the defense was playing better at the end of the year, and a lot of feedback I got on that was, well, yeah, they're not playing teams that are any good. And it's like, okay, well, these are the teams they're playing, and they're holding them to 20 points. So, right. like we don't make the schedule. So, but yeah, it's the exact same thing at the opposite now. It's like, all right, well, just because you're seeing the Packers and the Chiefs next year, you still got to figure out how to win some of those games, and definitely got to figure out how to win some of these conference or divisional games.
Not to cut you off, but that point of even these good teams, watch the Chiefs, watch the Bills, Packers, Bucks. They destroy these bad teams, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, and no one says, "Oh, you put up 45 on the Texans." Well, you're supposed to. So that's, and I'm not saying that's Bengals. I mean that if it's the Chiefs doing that, but you get to the playoffs, right? You play against good teams, and you're seeing the Bills score 24, and you're seeing the Chiefs score 26, and it's like, yeah, that's because that is the level of competition. So I never got that either. I think you should beat the bad teams. You should play good defense against the bad offenses. You should play good offense versus the bad defenses. If you don't, then we got a problem. So, like, for me, it's like people want to discredit it. I don't think you discredit it. You discredit it if they perform poorly against those teams.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you on that. And, yeah, that's what – it's how are you playing. It's not necessarily, the scoreboard in all those situations. It's how are you playing. Is everybody on their assignment? Are they able to match up where they do have some difficult matchups? Definitely with you on that. And, at the end of the day, a defense against Colt McCoy doesn't necessarily mean that much. But yeah, you can still look at just like, you're big into the draft. Like, you still watch the film when, they're playing a middle of the road team, when they're playing an FCS team or something like that. Yeah. You want to see the matchup against Bama, but when you see how the guy is playing, is he dominating the way he should against some lower competition? Is he still doing all his technique, all those sort of things? You can still make that kind of evaluation no matter who they're playing.
Oh, it's a different evaluation, like you're saying. Like, if I'm watching a guy versus Bama, I'm like, let's say it's an offensive lineman, right? I'm watching a left tackle versus Bama. I'm like, ooh, it's going to be a tough situation. I mean, he's going to have to compete for every single win that he's going to get. And you want to see that because that's what it's going to look like on Sunday. So it's a different evaluation than watching him versus Appalachian State, where I'm watching him, I'm like, I want him to show off. I want him to have his best game. I want to see what his high upside is in a situation where his team clearly outmatches the other team. Because, listen, we used to talk about this Carlos Dunlap. Dunlap would beat up on right tackles, bad ones, right? And, like, good ones, it'd be like, whatever. But you need those 6 games where he's going to beat up on that right tackle to win 6 games in the NFL. I mean, sure. You're not just running through good teams all year. You better win those 8 games against bad teams. And I think that's where, when we started this off, well, what if they beat the Giants? What does it really matter? What does it matter if they beat, some of these poor teams down the stretch, the Washington football team? Well, it matters because that means you're better than them. And that's the first step into getting where we need to go.
Absolutely. Now, when we talk about the offense, so obviously there weren't any changes to the coaching staff at the coordinator level, but you can make a really, really strong argument that since your head coach is calling the plays, you have an offensive-minded head coach, that they made an even bigger change than changing either of the coordinators, and that was bringing in a new offensive line coach in Frank Pollack. This was a name that fans wanted. It was a name that Joe Mixon and Billy Price specifically were very enthusiastic when this happened. What are your thoughts on Frank Pollack?
I like him. I think Pollack, from a metric standpoint, because first of all, like, what's an O-line coach do besides drafting, technique, and game planning, right? I mean, I think a lot of people don't realize they are run game coordinators in the NFL, and he got that official title, but all that is security for him because that's what you expect your guy to do. So it matters a lot. This isn't just like getting a linebacker coach or maybe a wide receiver coach. This is, if it's not, how would you rank it, right? Head coach, especially because our guy calls plays, offensive coordinator, and I might put O-line coach over quarterbacks coach. Even I know the importance of the quarterback, but O-line coach is actually getting scheme stuff in there throughout the week in terms of run game. So it's an important job, and it's not just, that's why Joe Mixon's happy, because that's a big part of what he's doing, and so just from there, I like Frank Pollack. I think before he was like a wide zone scheme kind of guy, Bill Callahan, West Coast stuff. Great, I want that. I think that fits this offense. It's going to be no problem. But he actually had to adapt and do some different things with the Jets, and I thought that worked too at times. And despite being with Adam Gase and whatever's going on with the New York Jets, Pollack was fine. And looking at metrics, and that's where I started to go with this before I got sidetracked, he typically gets above expected, whether that be yards per carry or protection-wise. His offensive lines end up above where his talent level on his roster currently sits. So that's a good thing. You want that. Jim Turner was the opposite. He usually got less than what the talent level was on the roster based on advanced data. So complete 180 there. You don't have to have a Bill Callahan to have a good offensive line. You just have to have not a Jim Turner. And so I'm very happy from that regard. So, yeah, I'm with it. I think that is a big addition. And, for the most part, I like this offensive staff now that the O-line coach is there. So I didn't have a problem. There was some rumors and rumblings that Brian Callahan could have been gone. I think they just wanted a fall guy. That's the way it seemed. And I'm glad, actually, that he's still there, because I think they've got a good unit or a good core of guys that are figuring things out, because it's not just Taylor. I know a lot of fans, when they talk about play calling or offensive design, I mean, it's not just one guy. It is a collective unit, and I kind of like what's going on. The execution, to me, is a bigger issue.
Yeah, the O-line coaches, I mean, that's a huge aspect. And honestly, from my experience, talking to some pretty high level coaches that I've met before and that I've worked with, honestly, a lot of offensive coaches, offensive coordinators come up and they're really quarterbacks guys. They're really pass games guys. Yeah. And to really have success, they've got to marry themselves. They've got to be connected with an O-line person that they can mesh with and they can work with. So huge signing. I think Gase and Adam Gase and Frank Pollack, they share a connection through the Broncos, through Kubiak with the Texans, where Pollack was there. So you see that wide zone, you see the boot. I think, honestly, we saw that early from Taylor. I think Taylor wants to be more of what the Broncos were with Kubiak, with Alex Gibbs, who they have a connection with as well. Was, in my opinion, the best offensive line coach there ever was. People will remember how they could. Really, the Denver Broncos around the turn of the century were the first team where you could put anybody at running back and they were dominant.
Remember that?
Was all Alex Gibbs.
Yeah, that was awesome.
That was that guy. And now that's what everybody does. Now it's like, well, that's what you have to do. You can't pay a running back, But we forget that for almost 20 years, John Elway couldn't win a Super Bowl because he didn't have a running back. And then all of a sudden, Terrell Davis was there, but it also didn't matter because when Terrell Davis was gone, Mike Anderson was really good. Linda Scary was really good.
Yeah, Clinton Portis.
Clinton Portis was really good though. But,
he was. I know.
But I mean, Terrell Davis was obviously great in Hall of Famer, but Terrell Davis, I think, was a 6th-round pick.
Right.
He's playing. He was on the kickoff team in preseason that year.
You remember that? He made a tackle. That's when that
was huge. Moment. I used to show that to players all the time. Like, this is what you need to do. Like, this is how you get where you want to be by standing out, by doing anything that's asked
Crush
of you.
That guy too.
Yeah, that was awesome. But so I mean, huge aspect there, and you see the connections. Now, in 18, I went back and watched a bunch of the film from 18. Much more productive. That O-line was worse than this O-line.
100%.
You can make a case because of the situation at left tackle that 2019 was worse than 2018, but 2018 was definitely worse than 2020. You and I were both, I believe, really big Frank Ragnow fans. That year, the Bengals ended up taking Billy Price.
So was Pollack, which is important to note. I think Pollack was ready to take Ragnow. They had a card filled out that said Frank Ragnow, and they had their hearts broken.
Yep, and I mean we all did.
Yes, we did.
So
And Frank, we should also update. Frank Ragnow is fantastic.
yes, absolutely. And I know I missed the boat on this because you're a big James Daniels guy as well, and he's doing a great job as well. I was a little I had Daniels and Price ranked about the same. I had Ragnow way in front of him, so I missed the boat on Daniels a little bit. But honestly, I went back and Price looked quite a bit better in his rookie season than I remember. Like I mentioned earlier, he was very excited about Frank Pollack coming back. Hopefully that's something where he can take a step forward this year. But I know you were critical at times about how they threw Price into the center role, whereas Frank Ragnow played guard in his rookie season, and they moved him over. So, I mean, do you think that's about Pollack? Do you think he's to blame for that? Do you think they didn't do a great job of bringing in Price?
Here's the part about that, and I think Cesar Ruiz this year is playing guard, and as what's his name was playing center from Texas A&M for the Saints. But that's a normal path, and I was critical of that because it's easier to get your feet wet at guard, less responsibility, and you can get your confidence up, and then you move those guys over when they're ready in year two. And I think that makes a lot of sense to me from the outside. And they had Trey Hopkins sitting right there. They could have figured out Hopkins, hey, he's actually a good center. But I digress. And the point is that Pollack's fault? I don't know that it is because the Bengals that year, it was like center or nothing, right? They filled some decent holes in free agency, and it was like, yeah, they're going to draft a center, and it was the worst kept secret. Everyone knew it. It's the reason why they're like, oh my God.
That's why the Lions traded in front of them.
Well, they get their guy, right? And the Bengals are stunned. They're shocked. And they say, okay, we'll take the next guy, Billy Price, which is a terrible way to draft. But that's a whole other subject, right? And so they knew they needed a center. They were going to play him at center no matter what. I think they were going to play Frank Ragnow at center no matter what. So it's kind of hard to say. I don't think Price was Pollack's guy. I just think that at that point it deferred to Duke Tobin, and they took Price at that time, and it was just like, okay, well, I'm going to do my best with what I have, and he's going to play center.
Yeah, I actually just chimed in on a Twitter conversation earlier. This kind of reminds me of. So, to me, it's like I like Ragnow, and then I think we both like Ragnow. I think the Bengals like Ragnow. You've got James Daniels in there. You've got Billy Price. I mean, unless you really had Billy Price ranked a lot higher than James Daniels, that's
apparently
they
did,
situation
from what I remember.
What's that?
Apparently they did have Daniels much lower than Price.
Okay.
And I think Zimmer would have and the Vikings would have taken Price a few picks later anyway. So Price was going in that range.
Okay.
I mean, what is that worth, right? It really doesn't matter. It's like when someone says, hey, Drew Sample would have went in the third round. I don't care. It's bad value.
Yeah, so I mean that kind of brings up the conversation of draft value, and there was a mock draft that came out recently, and like I said, you had posted about it on Twitter. It has the Bengals taking Slater at 5 from Northwestern instead of Penei Sewell. I mean, if you don't love the guy at that position, I mean, do you think that looking at the value of the pick and trading back and just making sure you get somebody when there's multiple guys at a position, do you think that is a smarter way to use your draft capital, or is it more about getting like your next target like they did with Price?
I think you have to balance that, right? Is it the target? Because you can also use the same argument that if Ragnow is that much further, like you and I would have had Ragnow way ahead of that center class, right?
Yes.
To give up that 4th round pick to move up 3 spots or 2 spots to get him and waste Mark Walton, I mean, hindsight, right? But that would have been completely worth it, obviously. So when you've got a guy that far ahead, you get him no matter what. You go get him, and he's your guy because you're that confident in it. And you're confident in every pick you make, or else you wouldn't make the pick. But, when they're on the board that far ahead, you go and get your guy. So looking at this class, if it's Sewell, Slater, and even Darisaw, I think is right there. I think Christian Darisaw from Virginia, he's good, and he's big, and he's long and strong. And for a guy that big is light on his feet and just a bully monster, I think he's going to go top 12. You got 3 tackles I think are going top 12. So where's the gap? If you don't have Sewell as a generational have to have him kind of guy, and some people do, some people don't. That's the thing. I think this is new for a lot of fans to hear the idea that, wait, Sewell's not some can't miss Anthony Munoz. He's not, but some people believe he is, but not everyone does. So there's a distinction there. If the Bengals fall in that group where they feel all three guys are very close and comparable, yes, you trade back. Now, if they feel Sewell or even Slater or Darisaw, even if we get to that point, is clear and far ahead and better than everyone else, then you get your guy and you don't mess around. So it's hard to say right now, right? Right now, I say three guys are really good in this class. Let me trade back. And they're all gone, I'm taking Kyle Pitts. But I think I can go back to 8, 9, 10 and end up with Darisaw. Then I am extremely happy with that. And I think that adds a second and maybe a fourth, fifth round pick, especially if they're going to get a quarterback. You can probably get even more out of that. Yeah, that's worth it for a team that could really use the talent and more picks.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a great point. I'm right with you. To me, Penny, like he's not a can't miss guy. But does he have top 5 pick upside? Does he have more upside than the other guys? That's the point you can make, you know, because he does some special things athletically. I think if he would have played this year, we might be having a different conversation.
Exactly.
You know, I think we might have played our way out of him by getting to 5 if he would have played this year, because he had some things he needed to clean up. Definitely improved a lot towards the end of the year, but he had some things he needed to clean up as well. So we'll have to see how that stuff goes.
I think the point there that should always be reminded when draft season rolls around is when we're talking about underclassmen, and this year because guys didn't play, but whenever we're talking about someone, whether it be a quarterback that's a sophomore and they say, oh, this guy's a future number 1 pick, or this guy's a top 5 pick, whoever you're talking about, and you're saying a year in advance, you are saying that with the caveat, and it's a very important one, that if he continues the development curve he's on, if he continues the trajectory he's on, if he improves on these little areas, which you expect him to, then he's a top 5 pick. If he does not, then he won't be. And that's why people go, well, I thought everyone was talking about this guy as a top 5 pick. Well, yeah, we were, if he would have continued the trajectory he was on. And so when you get a guy like Sewell that did not play, and neither did Rashawn Slater, we should say that.
Yes.
But so when you get a guy who did not play, you go back to that tape, and he was 18 and 19, so super young. That's an appealing part, but it also means he's kind of raw when you watch him. He's winning because he's bigger, nastier, and more athletic and longer and stronger than everyone he goes against, right? You watch him and you go, oh, he missed his hand placement, but it doesn't matter because he's a freak. Look at that. And you just marvel at what he can do, which is a good thing. You do want that. But you would have come away with last year's tape and say, okay, this guy's a lock for top 3 or 5 if he just cleans up a little bit of his footwork and handwork, and he's a lock. He's a generational guy if that happens. We never got to see if that happened. That's the part. So I think fans need to realize that. We did not get to see that last few steps of development. We can assume he would have because he was so good at a young age, and it sounds like from people that do O-line work in the offseason and things like that he is doing that work, and the next time we see him, teams are going to go, oh, all right, let's go. And if that's the case, then we may have played ourselves out of it at 5. But if it's not, then there is a decent chance he's there.
Yeah, and I mean, that's going to be the crazy thing about this year. You know, you're really going to have to do your homework. And when I say you're going to have to do your homework, I mean NFL teams, because we're not going to be able to do it from home on guys like Penny, like Jamar Chase, like Slater. You know, these guys that didn't play, what have they been doing? You know, what have they been doing? I mean, they're not even going to have a combine. You know, so it's going to be a very funky year. And whoever is most flexible in the way they evaluate players, you know, can get the most out of it, is going to win big this year, in my opinion. Now, I think it's interesting, too, because we talk about all these linemen, and, you know, if you don't have Penny way above, I'm right with you. I think Slater and Darisaw are very close 2 and 3 for me. I like Cosme. I like Walker Little. Like, there's some good players in there. We could see 6 guys go in the first round, but like the Dolphins, people think that they're going to take Penny. I don't know why they don't take Chase, because I think they can get one of those guys at 18, and I think the receiver talent takes a much bigger nosedive by 18 than the offensive tackle talent does. And again, unless you're absolutely in love with Penny and you think he is the dude, I think it takes a much bigger dive. So, what are your thoughts as to kind of transition into the receiver, the Jamar Chase, Devontae Smith, even Jalen Waddle conversation in the first round?
Yeah, I know. We got to talk about it because the guys are so good. I think normally we wouldn't have this conversation. And also think about the Dolphins, too. They drafted 2 offensive linemen last year, Austin Jackson and Robert Hunt.
Yes.
So
Yep.
I think they're primed to take a wide receiver. And now I don't know who fits them best. We only care about us here with the Bengals. But I don't think we would talk receiver. And now I do think receiver is a need because they really don't have a speed guy, right? If I was looking at this team and I say, okay, Tyler Boyd, good. I love him in the slot. Not really threatening you as a defense. He's going to catch 10 balls for 100 yards, and you'll probably take that on defense, but he's not going to be a game-breaking guy that you really have to worry about, even though he's good. T. Higgins has deep ability because he's got great ball skills, size, judges it good in contested situations. He wasn't this year as good as he should have been, but I think he'll get back to where he was at Clemson, and he can be a deep threat, a different kind of guy like A.J. Green was, but you still – that is not as scary still for defenses. It's the guy where, and I know John Ross sucked. He was a bust technically, but he would go out there and safeties would go, okay, start rotating that way right away. Like, all right, don't let him get over top of us. Nothing scares defense more than a one play, 45, 60, 70-yard touchdown because you give them 10, 12, 14 plays while they may be tired. I think defensive coaches look at that like, I'll take my chance that we're going to create a turnover or have the offense, mess up, whether it be a sack or a false start or a holding, whatever the case may be, and your drive's over. So, I think Higgins isn't scaring defenses yet until he's a legit, elite type downfield weapon. So what's that leave you with? If they had to go start a roster right now or play a game with the roster right now, it'd be Auden Tate, who is fine for a fourth guy, but he's, again, the speed factor is not there with him. I think you would clamp down on these guys if you're any defensive coordinator and you would roll that safety towards Higgins and say, okay, let's go and try and beat us over the top. And you'd probably feel pretty good about it. So they have a need at receiver. And now you can find, this is the thing for me. I love evaluating wide receivers. If they don't want to take one at 5, that's fine. I will find you a guy in round 2, 3, 4, or 5 that can come in and help you in some way, especially a guy that can get deep. But these 2 guys at the top, Devonta Smith and Jamar Chase, are so good that we have to talk about it. And we have to talk about it because, number one, Chase played with Burrow, and they were electric together. I mean, for as good as Burrow was, Chase was as good at receiver and was doing it at 19 years old, which is just crazy. So that's up the alley the Bengals like, and I would love to have that connection there. And I think he's more athletic and faster than people give him credit for because he was so good in contested situations and so strong. And I think that type sometimes gets confused as one or the other. But these guys, when they go top 6, 7, 8, it's because they can do both normally. Even Devonta Smith, who's not the biggest guy, he makes some great arm, hand catches in traffic and concentration through contact. And I'm like, okay, he's that kind of guy too. So we have to have the conversation. I tend to drift towards the guy who produced at a younger age. When all things are that close, I will lean towards the analytics at that point, and that would be Jamar Chase for me. And if they did, I think this receiving core is just filthy at that point.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that too, because as we've gotten into the end of the season, people have been talking about the 2, and they're like, well, Chase isn't that athletic. He's not a special athlete. And I'm like, he's not?
Right. He averaged 21 yards per catch.
He was LSU's speed guy, right. and I'm with you. And I think it's kind of perfect. Let's not talk about the fact that he played with Burrow before right now, but he's perfect for Burrow in that, to me, he is a speed guy who can also make those contested catches and make those back shoulder catches and do a lot of the things that Burrow is really good at, but he's also the spread the field guy.
Yep.
That's why I think he's the perfect fit.
Yak guy, too. They don't have a yak guy.
Yes, absolutely. And you make a good point, too, because, look, you got T. I think people are going to be concerned about T deep, like they're concerned about AJ deep, because he can go up, he can be a jump ball guy. If you get a guy like Chase who can stretch the field, you can't play a single high safety now. No more. The run game explodes. If you can't play a single high safety, number one, you can run the ball, and number two, a lot of stuff's going to be open in the middle of the field for Tyler Boyd as well. Exactly. So, I don't know. I mean, yeah, that to me, that's a huge component of it. being able to do that. Now, at the same point, you make a good case that I think there are some guys that you can get. I think you can get a guy in the third or fourth round that's going to be a good third receiver for you. Yeah. I think you can probably not spend too much on a Josh Reynolds. I think you were a big Josh Reynolds guy when he came out, were you?
That's right.
I think you can do those things, but this is like a special opportunity, and it's like when the Falcons didn't need Calvin Ridley, but they took him because it was a special opportunity, and obviously the other things haven't gone well for them, but that's how I look at it. And I'm a big Devontae Smith fan. Like, I really like Devontae Smith.
He's good.
But I think Chase is the guy this team needs.
Yeah, I'm with you. And it's funny because even maybe like 5 to 10 years ago, there was a lot of argument. I remember having this argument when the Bengals took A.J. Green at 4, was it's a receiver. It's like the last piece to the puzzle right at the time. And how many good teams are actually winning with a number 1 type receiver? It was more like to spread it around. The slot guys were really becoming big at that time. They're not wrong. And then now you see what do the final 4 teams have, right? The Bills loaded at receiver, headed by Stephon Diggs. The Chiefs loaded at receiver, headed by Tyreek Hill and maybe even Sammy Watkins when he's healthy. He had a great Super Bowl last year. The Packers probably should have drafted a receiver, but Devontae Adams cannot be covered. I want that. And then you go to the Bucs right now, and they're loaded at receiver, right, headed by Mike Williams. We're talking, guys, you need receivers now. And they may be a dime a dozen or getting to that point where every team's got 3 or 4. Even the Bengals this year, terrible offense. At times, there were 6, 7 deep at receiver when Mike Thomas or Erickson were in there making a few plays, and they weren't good. But that's the idea, is that you have a depth chart now that should be diverse, and you got a guy that can give you everything, or enough guys that can give you everything, that you should have a good receiving core. It is vital to an offense these days. So it's not overstated to say, I know left tackle, or it doesn't even have to be left tackle. I know offensive line is a huge need, but rolling out Auden Tate as your number 3 right now is not ideal. And when 3 guys start, I want that guy to be somebody a little bit better. And if they don't address it in free agency, I think they address receiver. If it's not at 5, it's in round 2 or 3. It's going to be a premium pick.
Yeah, definitely needs to be an investment there somewhere. And like you said, adding some speed there. And yeah, it's just Chase is just so perfect. And I don't buy he's got a rapport with Burrow thing, because I think that's going to come. It's sure. Not about winning September next year. It's about the long-term plan. So I don't even look at that. I don't even really care about that. But just because of what he can do as a very underrated speed guy who can also make those contested catches, that would be lights out if they could do that. I'm just terrified because I just think the Dolphins are stupid if they don't take him, to be honest with you. So
I know I'm hoping they take Devonta Smith. Maybe
they'll decide they want their connection with Tua and they'll go that route. So
yeah.
All right. So that's that's a little bit about the draft. So there is always that case. What if Chase isn't there? What if Penny isn't there? Maybe you can't trade down. People don't love these quarterbacks as much. So the other big name and another playmaker in a slightly different role is Kyle Pitts. He's a tight end, but is he really a tight end?
Right.
Is Kyle Pitts a top 5 guy?
Oh, talent and yeah. Prospect, he's a top 5 prospect, I think, in my mind. For me, it'd be how I would rank them. It would be right now, I would take Penny over Chase just because I feel like getting that guy, and the talent level on their offensive line right now is really poor. Getting that guy would do a lot for him. But Chase is right there. I'm talking, if one's in 90 or the other guy's in 89 in my book. But then right there, right behind them, my number 3 target right now would be Kyle Pitts. And I'd love it in a value situation where I can trade down. But yeah, as a prospect, I'm talking about a guy who's 20 years old and moves like a good receiver, like a freak receiver in that size. And it's crazy to watch him because, you know what, the thing is, whether you watch Travis Kelce this weekend or Darren Waller is kind of who I get more when I watch Pitts, those guys can't be covered in today's NFL. It haunts defensive coordinators, especially if you've got a guy that can get deep, because you want to put a safety on that tight end because you feel more comfortable with the matchup athletically and size wise. Well, that means you've got to play single high, and that is scary because if this team has weapons on the outside, it's the reason why Kelsey is so open for the Chiefs all the time. When you watch him this weekend, you're going to see, because you got to help with Tyreek Hill out there. Kelsey's just going to be sitting by himself because they're like, maybe we can bracket him with two linebackers. Maybe we can bracket him with a safety, the nickel corner, and the linebacker. It doesn't work. You can't cover the elite tight ends. But the other half of the conversation is these elite tight ends are normally drafted rounds 3, 4, 5. Give me an athletic guy. He takes 3 years to develop because that seems to be the cycle for those guys. And then you have a good one. So I'm not against saying, they could use an athletic tight end and let's take one in round 4, the most athletic guy we can find, and let's develop him and see what he is in 2 years. That's a perfectly fine plan to me. But when I watch Kyle Pitts, I go, oh my God, he can't be covered. And if you can add a guy who cannot be covered, I'm talking – you're going to feed him 120 targets at least his rookie year. He's the type of guy who is kind of your number one right away as a tight end, and that changes your offense, and it gives Burrow a high percentage target that can also create explosive plays out of it. It's just, I want that on my team. I just don't want to spend what it's going to require to spend it.
Yeah, and look, if he's not giving you what you want in the run game, then you run 12 personnel and he's a glorified receiver. And you can make that work if you're a halfway decent coach.
How many times do we see they motion in a receiver to block anyways? Screw
yes,
that.
Absolutely.
Let's do it with Pitts instead. Give me a 3-by-1 formation with Pitts on the outside isolated. Make the defense show you exactly what they're covering and what they're doing right then and there, and just let them run ISO routes against that guy, and let's go.
And it's funny because they love receivers that can block.
They do.
So yeah, like is he going to be any worse than that? No. And he's also he's 6'6", and like I feel like a lot of tight ends, even though they're big, like maybe because they're big, they're not really jump ball guys. They're just kind of stand there and be bigger guys. But it's like watching Jamar Chase. Like he's a good contested catch type of guy, and you want to put a safety on him. Do you have a safety that's 6'6"?
Right.
You know what I mean? I mean, you're probably better off putting a linebacker on him if you got one that could run. I mean, it just creates all kinds of nightmares for a defensive coordinator when you've got a guy like that. You're thinking, what are we going to do with this guy? Because you're losing either way. Like you're losing on speed if you put a linebacker out there, but you're losing on the size if you put a safety on him. So,
and with the ball placement of Burrow, like go ahead and put the smaller guy on him, and he'll cover and stay in Pitt's hip pocket, maybe. Because this guy, that better be a pretty athletic safety. But Burrow, it wouldn't matter. That would still be open for a guy like Burrow.
So we talked about the offense. Really, the change at O-line was the most obvious change. The other change that a lot of people thought was coming that didn't come was a defensive coordinator. Anarumo, suspected, fire, not fired. What are your thoughts on Anarumo over the last 2 seasons? And, I mean, is he a guy that when you get the offense where it needs to be, let's not compare him to Wink Martindale or anything.
Right.
But when you get the offense where it needs to be, do you think Anarumo can be a guy that can have the defense, competitive enough to be able to hold teams under 30 points when the offense is able to score like that on a regular basis?
Because let's be honest, that's the goal at this point, right? Score 30, get a turnover or a punt or a field goal, and you win the game, right? Yes. And that's how it works in today's NFL, and they're not too far from that. I think the hard part of this question is we haven't seen – how many games have we seen with the offense clicking like that? Mm-hmm. 4 maybe in 2 years? And, yeah, they did the job for most of those games, so it's hard to say. You really just don't know yet. You got to take bits and pieces of when they beat or at least stayed competitive in games, and you go, okay, it's a good game plan against the Titans. It's good against the Steelers. It was a good game plan against the Texans, whatever the case may be. And you pull pieces from that. I think the part with Anarumo that makes it maybe it controls the conversation a little bit too much is how the Bengals came to Anarumo, right? How they ended up getting to that spot of it seemed like about 4 or 5 guys turned them down or they couldn't come to an agreement with, whatever the case may be. And Taylor fell back on a guy he worked with in Miami in Lou Anarumo. And it seemed like he was, sure, a shot in the dark. He's going to play a multiple defense. I like that. I like actually having a defensive backs coach. I feel like they are the guys that would see the entire defense for what it is rather than a guy who maybe just be a linebacker or a D-line coach. So he's got that vision of knowing what everyone should do. So I was fine with it, and all things considered, with the path they had to take to get there and to get to him. The thing that also throws me off since then is the rumblings, the things you hear, the discontent of maybe like a Carlos Dunlap, where it's like, man, he had no respect for Lou Anarumo at all. I remember right before Preston Brown was cut, Nick Vigil and I was a source told me that what was going on with there. Like Nick Vigil had to go to them and say, guys, we don't have clear checks. We don't have clear rules on this stuff. If this guy goes into motion, what do you want us to do? How do you want us to react if they're coming out in a 3-by-1? How do you want us to react if they come out in 11 personnel and then go bunch? I mean, they just did not have things defined. He was in over his head, it sounded like. And this wasn't from one guy. Some is your linebacker that's trying to call plays here, and he doesn't know what to call when things are happening, and he wants to know what to call. And so he had to call a meeting of we need some basic stuff. As we talk about the O-line and the run game last year at the bye week, figuring it out, the defense went through a similar transition in that time frame, and with better results. And I mean, I think that's part of the overall story of this coaching staff. I think in a lot of ways is the little rumors and rumblings you hear of, they don't know everything yet, and that would be okay if they had better results on the field and they were learning on the job. I think having the COVID season doesn't help when you can't get guys in. You can't figure out how to, you can't practice running a practice as a coach. You might say, oh, well, we can be a little more efficient here. I remember going to the Senior Bowl, probably the last time all of these reporters and beat guys saw this coaching staff in action. And there was a lot of talk with people that, we're sitting at the bar that night, and people like, why do the Bengals run it like that? And I'm like, well, what do you mean? They're like, well, watch the Lions tomorrow. And the Lions are super efficient. And, they're using all four corners of the field at all times, and everyone's getting practice time. Then you go back and you watch the Bengals, you go, oh, yeah, there's guys standing around, not really doing anything, waiting for that part of the field to be not used so they can get in there. So I'm like, all right, so are they not practicing as efficient? It's a lot of things like this where you go, okay, all right, well, they got to figure it out. They got to iron some things out. And I think when you hear about Lou Anarumo and how some of the players viewed him, it was along those lines of, yeah, he's in over his head. And I think some veteran guys weren't down with it. And I think that's why they had to purge a few of them, and they did. And maybe now guys like Jesse Bates can gather these guys up, and, Carl Lawson finally gets to be a full-time starter. So if they retain him, maybe he can rally them around Anarumo and get them all to buy in, because that is a huge part of actually churning out results for a team with a new staff. I don't know. I think they could have upgraded at that position, but I wonder, even if I ranked offensive coaches earlier, I even think defensive coordinator comes behind offensive line coach and what today's importance is in the NFL. So they just have to be good enough to be a competitive team. And then we may get to that point if they go 8-8 and the defense is still a bottom 10 unit where we go, all right, now's the time to get someone else. And that would be the time they would actually attract somebody.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting too, because you mentioned the Steelers game. The Titans are a good team. That was a playoff level team. Yeah. It seems like they play the best against some of the better competition they face. And really, like that first Steelers game, the Steelers had 6 possessions in the first quarter. Yeah, I mean, it was just part of the 6th possession in the first quarter, but that's a half of football, because Alex Erickson fumbled a punt. I think there was an interception or a fumble on offense in there, something like that. Like, they were in some shitty spots. And, that first Ravens game, too, there were a couple of turnovers early that led to those early points in the first quarter.
It's one of those games you want to throw out the tape, right?
Yeah, the Bengals, there was a fumble, and the Ravens returned it later in the game. So, for the majority of the game, the defense was playing really well. And again, against, Lamar was banged up. I get it. But like against a pretty good competition there. So it's interesting they can stand up in those situations now. If year two of Burrow and hopefully seeing some more out of the offensive staff, like you mentioned the things that are important about defense. I kind of feel like that's important too. That's like a stop the bleeding moment. You know what I mean? Like,
oh yeah,
can the defense hold this good offense long enough so our offense can figure some shit out?
I don't think we can undersell that point. If the offense is good, the defense is dramatically improved because
absolutely
you want to be game script is like, if you're a younger fan, or maybe that we don't talk about game script enough, it should be talked about way more than it is. When you are in control of the game and you can run it at will because you're ahead, you can pass rush because you're ahead, you can, run some tricky stuff, you can pass block a little bit more because you're ahead and you're not coming from behind. So much of what you can actually execute is dependent on the game script and being in control of the game. The defense for the last 2 years has rarely been in control of a situation, and it's only the fault of the offense. The offense has been bad if we've played 32 games now in 2 years, they've been bad for 24 of them, maybe, let's say, or at least not in the point where the defense has any help at all. You're not going to you can throw away anything you know of for that many games on defense. You just can't look at it and say, oh, they played well for this drive or that drive. Yeah, that's how it's going to look. And then eventually they're going to break, and it's going to be 400 yards in week 17. And people, I've heard Jeff Hobson recently mention that a lot, and I'm like, yeah, that's what's going to happen when the offense can't move the ball at all. That will happen every week if a team wants to run it that much. And it's so tied to the offensive output.
Yeah, and really, you mentioned what's important about defense, and look, red zone defense and creating turnovers, especially when you have Joe Burrow, when you have that quarterback. Can I get that guy opportunities? Can I get that guy more touches on the ball? We saw a couple years ago. Look, the NFL rules at the time helped out the Patriots by Patrick Mahomes not getting to touch the ball in overtime, but the Patriots used the clock. And I say use the clock, not ran the football, but they let time tick on the clock when they were on offense and stole a possession from Mahomes.
That's the other
part. You can do that with your offense and be smart and take a possession away from that guy. But your defense needs to create possessions for that guy. That's what it's all about. And as a defensive coach, the majority of the time you're thinking, I can't get beat. It's about, I'm not going to give up a big play.
Look at these final.
When are you going for a pick? When are you going for a turnover? Right. It's the situations that you can predict. It's getting them into a certain formation in a certain part of the field and a certain down and distance. When you've done all the homework and this is it, we can jump this ball, we can take a shot at it because we know what's coming. It's about creating those opportunities. And when you're in a better position, because your offense is playing, you're able to create more of those positions. But unfortunately, I mean, like I said, it's kind of on the offense for the defense not being able to, be in those positions. But to me, the one thing I would say about Anarumo, I don't think, if you want to fire him because you don't think he's good enough to be the guy to get you to where you want to be, I'm fine with that. I don't think he deserved to be fired based on their performance last year because of all those bad situations they were in and because of some personnel issues that they had. But if you want to say Lou Anarumo didn't create enough turnovers, that I'm 100% on board with, because this defense did not create enough turnovers. So that's definitely something we need to see, along with that offensive production, them figuring out how to create those turnover opportunities. Because that's definitely what it's all about: stealing opportunities for your quarterback.
Man, wild card weekend. Watch playoff football. I know a lot of fans, and maybe you're listening to this because you're just straight up a Bengals fan. They watch their team, they shut off the TV, and that's it for the day, right? You've got to watch the rest of the league, especially, and people are probably watching the playoffs. They get high ratings, but you've got to pay attention to what you're watching. Watch how many of these defenses are punching at the ball, constantly punching at the ball. Watch how often they capitalize when that ball gets tipped, when they're diving for it, and they're actually going to come up with these interceptions. The Bengals, I mean, I think of Darius Phillips versus the Steelers, should have had 3 interceptions. Didn't come down with any of those that are in his hands, and he's got good ball skills. I mean, creating turnover opportunities is great. Capitalizing on turnover opportunities is the goal. And I think the Bengals have a long way to go there. I'm with you. I'd love to see them if they were just drilling, punching the ball out constantly. And I think if Marlon Humphrey gets 10 forced fumbles in a year, that's crazy, man. And we're talking receivers are the guys that are going to fumble. You need to be punching the ball out of those guys as much as possible. And you look at these final 4 teams in the playoffs right now. Do any of them really have a great defense? You wouldn't say so. You'd say they all are led by their offense. But you look at their numbers, and they're not that bad on defense. Why? It's game script, man. The offense is scoring 30-plus points a game, and now that pass rush is pinning their ears back, and they're creating turnover opportunities because those windows are getting tighter and tighter because they're only rushing 4, and they can play like that. So I think, it is hand-in-hand. It's a very symbiotic relationship between offense and defense in this league right now.
Absolutely. That was a big thing. Look, whatever was going on with Dunlap, he wasn't getting it done for them. Hubbard was banged up.
Yeah.
Geno was obviously very much hurt. So, you had Carl Lawson. You had one guy. And being able to have that pass pressure, that's going to create some turnover opportunities for you in the secondary. You made a great point. I'm trying to remember. Help me out if you remember it, but was it the Browns game where they broke a long run and Bates came in from behind and punched the ball out?
Oh man, I'm not remembering that at all.
I can see the play, and I can't even make.
It had to be. It was the Browns.
So yeah, I mean, you see him doing it, and that's honestly that's the best opportunity for you there in the secondary because
you have to be confident enough that your teammates are coming to rally for the tackle, right? Yes. And that's the only way you can really do it. And I totally understand it if you're like, all right, I need to make a sure tackle here because I'm the only guy out here, or the rest of the team is loafing and not getting here. But if you feel like the rest, like the Ravens, they are a team rally tackle type team. Go ahead and punch that ball out. Hold that guy up. How many times do you see the whistle blown against the Ravens? They don't even put the guy to the ground.
Yes.
There's 4 guys around him, and they're ripping at the ball, and they just have stopped his progression.
Yes, and that's exactly. And this is, I mentioned some things about tackling from time to time. Number one, you don't put. You and I have talked about this in terms of concussions and stuff. We've been in some of the same opportunities, but look, the way to tackle to not get concussions is to tackle high. You bend your waist, but you keep your head up.
Mm-hmm.
You shoot your hips. It's just like everything else. Like your power's in your hips. You shoot your hips. It's like doing a snatch or a power clean or something. Like your head's not down. So that's number one. That's safe. Number 2, it's a sure tackle. And number 3, you keep the guy up because you don't want to tackle. You want to. Eventually, you're going to tackle him. But just like you're saying about the Ravens, it's like eventually they're going to blow the whistle. You just got to hold on, and then especially that second guy to be able to come in and rip the ball out. Like that's what's creating those opportunities. For the turnovers, and again, it doesn't.
Think of that.
That's what it's about. That's what defensive football is nowadays. It's creating opportunities.
It is. Think of that Bills-Colts game. You remember they fumble right at the end that they ruled the guy was down, right? And they ruled that they blew the whistle, whatever. Even after reviewing that wild card game here, and Jordan Poyer waits for the receiver to get up. I think it was Michael Pittman. Waits for him to get off the ground and then punches the ball out. If they're not teaching that, I would be completely surprised of that type of situational awareness of
Absolutely.
guys. Yeah, you can jump on them and lay an elbow into him if you want, and a lot of defensive guys would love that opportunity to hit the guy while he's on the ground for a free tackle. But is it about tackling the guy, or is it about creating an opportunity to get that ball back for your offense? And I think you just don't see that enough where the Bengals are aware of the situation enough to be like, okay, we can punch this ball out.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, and again, a big part of that you mentioned, loafing and stuff. Like it's about trust. It's about knowing I can go for this because that guy's got my back. Because we're not going to give up a touchdown even if I miss this tackle because I'm going for the ball. When you talk about tackling, people talk about putting your head into it. They used to teach that. Like they can't be teaching that anymore. Like nobody should be teaching that anymore because it's. We know too much now.
And I think that's why fumbles are different now too, right? Remember you put your head on the ball and you knock that thing out of there. You don't see that as much now because guys aren't dropping their heads and spearing. So a different way to force the fumbles is definitely the punching now.
Absolutely. So we're going a little bit long here, but just one more thing as long as we're on the topic of defense. No change to the defensive coordinator, but probably the most obvious position to change on the defensive side of the ball would be the D-line coach. I mean, really, they got a new corners coach and a new linebackers coach last year, and seem to be on a better page with things now. But you look at this defensive line. I kind of honestly, I thought sometimes it was like they were getting pressure, but they weren't using disengage moves, which I kind of look at coaching and I think, what are they not being told to get off the blocks? So they did move on from Nick Eason. They brought in Marion Hobby. He's a guy. He's got some experience with the Dolphins, with the Jaguars, with Clemson. Coached DJ Reader for all 4 years. Was also co-defensive coordinator there. He was technically the defensive ends coach, but I'm sure he had something to do with DJ Reader there.
A lot of experience.
So also, by the way, coaching with Flores, that's a true 3-4.
Yeah,
like that's a real 3-4 defense. That they're running in Miami. A lot of bear fronts. Some of the stuff that we see. So kind of makes sense in terms of a scheme fit there. What are your thoughts on Hobby?
I like a guy with a lot of experience. Obviously, that helps. I think the coaching staff that first year when we looked at it across the board, we're like, "Ooh, they are light on experience." And then they get the I'm forgetting the name of the linebacker coach that they hired last year, and they have slowly started to gain a little bit more experience back on the staff, and I think that's key. So I'm good with that. I think the hard part for me when they had Eason, and it's funny on the Lockdown podcast when my co-host and I were talking during these hirings, we were like, man, this is such a weird defensive staff they're putting together. They got some 3-4 guys, some 4-3 guys, some zone blitz guys. I typically am not, if you're going to have some 3-4 elements, I'd like to have an outside linebacker coach, inside linebacker coach, or an edge coach versus my interior D-line coach. The Ravens do this. And I think because it's different skills, it's different positions. You got Nick Eason, who's an interior guy his whole life. Coaching edge guys, I'm not expecting the most productivity out of that position. Maybe that's just me and being a little short-sighted or using a little hindsight too, because they could have been more productive on the defensive line. But you brought this up, and I think it should be hammered home as much as possible. When you've got one guy creating pressure consistently in Carl Lawson, you are not going to have a good pass rush as a unit. It takes 3 guys, and you can have. And I don't mean you need 3 Carl Lawsons. I mean you need Carl Lawson, and ideally when they had Atkins and Dunlap, they were getting pressure, with Lawson as much as possible. Well, when Lawson wasn't playing or Michael Johnson was down, even with Atkins and Dunlap, it dropped. I think you need a triangle. You need interior pressure, and you need both edge pressures. And right now the Bengals are far away from it. You can argue it's as big of a need, that defensive line, and getting a pass rusher or getting 2 more is as big as offensive line need. And it's just not as important as the whole line and protecting Burrow, so it's taking a back seat in terms of rankings. But I think they've got a long way to go there in getting these guys to being a respectable pass rush. Whether it's 3-4, 4-3, I don't care. You need 3 guys to get it done. So for me, I think he's got his work cut out for him because I think they need to find a new 3-tech. I think they need to find another edge. So even if he coaches them well, they don't have the players right now to be where we want them to be.
Yeah, they definitely need to focus on the defensive line. I think really the problems with the defense last year, no CB2. I love Darius Phillips, but he should be your 4th guy. Right. And we see what happens when he's not, by the way, because then when he gets hurt, you got LaShawn Simpson there.
He's an ideal number 4 guy, to be honest.
He's perfect because he can play inside and out. He's a good, solid player at any of those spots. So, so Trey comes back and they put a lot of money into him. But if you have Trey and you re-sign William Jackson, you can feel pretty good about that secondary.
Oh yeah,
it is the D line. Like you gotta figure something out there. You gotta, to me, it's like you need when Hubbard goes inside, to really for Reader. Hubbard should be going inside for Reader. You need a 3 technique that can rush, and then you need another guy to go on the outside when Hubbard bumps in. Look, these guys cost a lot of money. I think you can find some guys though. Yeah. I think a lot of the guys that we like in the draft right now that we think are a lot of the guys being mocked in the 3rd round and stuff, like Patrick Jones from Pittsburgh. Like that guy's like a mid-round pick right now in mock drafts.
Yeah,
I think that guy's going the first damn round. That guy.
Oh, if he's not, he's the pick at wherever they pick in round 2. You know what I mean? I think that's where he ends up.
Yeah, you better be picking up your damn phone because that dude is Chandler freaking Jones.
They got a 3-tech too. That's I think, yeah.
If they don't get one of those guys, the Tywin guy they got this dude Weaver too. Like honestly, Weaver might be the best fit for the Bengals of the group because I think he could be like a 5 technique, but he can also rush from the 3 technique. Like
just go watch Pitt D-line.
Just
guys.
his versatility.
Go have fun with that. It's a good time.
Yeah, if they get anybody from that D-line, I'm freaking happy. But yeah, I mean, I think there are some guys you can get. Like again, if you get really excited about a guy and you think he's low, you're probably right, and he's probably going to go really high.
Yeah, if you like him that much, he's going to go way higher than you think. I remember I've plenty of times been in January like, oh man, this Stephon Gilmore is really good. I'd love to have him at 21. Well, he ends up, going way higher than that, and that's how it happens.
And I think mock drafts tend to underestimate how fast pass rushers go in the draft.
Oh yeah,
like pass rushers and offensive tackles, like there's going to be like 6 of each taken in the first round, and nobody's putting that in their mock right now, but it's probably going to freaking happen. So
it's a thing that every team needs. Every team needs offensive line help. Every team wants more pass rush.
Absolutely. So we'll see how those things break down, but I don't know. I mean, I think if you're good, if you evaluate, like I think you can get it without going crazy with your investment there. Like if you could fall into a guy, a Basham or a Jones or one of those guys in the second round, like you're golden. Like you're making out pretty damn well if you can fall into one of those positions. So
and that's why free agency.
I'm with you 100% because we talk about like a lot of people are talking about fix the offense. And it's like, yeah, but you got to help them out by having a defense too.
Yeah. And that's what I was going to say. In free agency, if they can go get a third wave D-end or a third wave, let's say they lose William Jackson, right? And it feels like that for some reason. It should not happen. But if it does, like, go get a defensive end to help out because your corners, you're going to take a downgrade. William Jackson, on most accounts, is the best corner available in free agents, best veteran. If you're not spending a number 5 pick, you mean you're getting worse off at that position, even if it's in round 2, round 3, wherever they end up with a corner. That means, okay, you may want to you don't want to spend $16 million on Jackson. You better go spend $8 million on another pass rusher of some sort. And so, in my opinion, this draft talk and defense talk is I'm kind of waiting to hold of what happens with Carl Lawson and William Jackson because those are 2 of your 4 best players on defense. I'm thinking Bates and Reeder as the other ones. It's important. How I build my defense and how I'm going to construct and attack it is largely dependent on those 2 guys.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And for all the issues the defense has, if those 2 guys walk, you suck.
Yep. Bad. You go from being like the 26th defense to you are 32. No doubt.
I mean, and honestly, like, I don't know if 30 points is enough at that point. Like, and we're not even just talking about the Chiefs and Packers game. Like, man, like that it's not enough because you're not doing you're not getting after the quarterback at all without Lawson on the field.
Covering.
I like Hubbard, but he's a role player. Sorry. And yeah,
he's good. Hubbard's good against the run, but what is that worth? Yes. That's like having a nose tackle. I like DJ Reader. I'm glad they signed him. I'm glad they spent that money. But he is a nose tackle that is better against the run. So, they've kind of already said, we like these guys. I wouldn't be surprised if they extend Hubbard in this offseason. But what that means is you guys are really, really, really hurting for another pass rusher.
You know who Hubbard is? And this is going to sound like
Michael
a crazy
Johnson.
competition. Was that?
He's Michael Johnson.
Oh, I was going to make a crazier one. I was going to say he's Patrick Chung. Like,
okay. He's in a completely different position.
Yeah. Well, because Patrick Chung is like the man with the Patriots, but he left for a year and he couldn't do anything. And he went in about going back. Like,
Michael Johnson.
I think the Bengals really get Sam Hubbard. I think they're maximizing his talent. Like, you look at his sacks. He had like 8 or 9 sacks last year. I think it was 8.5 actually. Yeah. But you look at him, most of them are created.
Yeah.
Like they know how to stun him. They know how to put him in different positions. He's actually pretty good. He's actually a pretty good 3-4 outside linebacker, unlike, that wasn't really a natural position for Carlos Dunlap.
Anthony Spencer for the Cowboys, 3-4 outside linebacker guy, but really never should have been. Good against the run, high effort guy, really cleaned up a lot of DeMarcus Ware's pressures and sacks, only because DeMarcus Ware was so damn good, and they had other good, defensive linemen too in there. But like that's who Hubbard reminds me of too. Of like, if he's your third or fourth guy in your D line, great, I'm happy, let's do it. But right now he's your number 2, and that's you're just looking at it like it's not good enough.
Yeah, excellent role player, but let's not break the bank for him, and let's not like put too much on him and say, well, this has got to be our top sack guy, because you're in a lot of freaking trouble if that's how you're trying to create pressure. So, all right, well, again, today's guest, Joe Goodberry. Lots of good conversation here, so appreciate you joining us. Joe, if people aren't following you yet, where can they follow you in your work and your opinions here?
It's on Twitter. It's the best place to reach me. At Joe Goodberry, just like it sounds. And we'll talk about everything and anything for the most part.
All right. Sounds good. So, yeah, make sure you are giving Joe a follow. Semi-retired now, but still
the passion's still there.
Opinions, still probably just watching as much film as he is, just not having to organize his thoughts in more than
you're exactly right. I'll watch it, fall asleep, wake up. I think it was in the third quarter. Let's go back to it. And I don't have to write anything. It's great.
It's it's an addiction. It really is. It's like that's how I got here, because I was my Coach Minich is not a. It's not a character. It's not a brand. It's a Twitter account that was set up for recruiting. And now that I'm less actively coaching, I actually am coaching again. But now that I'm not coaching full time, it's just like I have to have an outlet. I have to watch film. I have to talk about it. And it's the same thing. Like you can try and get out. But we're gonna drag you back in. And especially when they start winning some games, you're not gonna be able to stay away. So, but anyway, Joe, appreciate you coming on today, and everybody for listening. Thanks for checking it out. Who Day? We'll be here all off season. Who Day?